The opening scene begins with a metaphorical depiction of men as wild horses, instinctively yearning for freedom and autonomy to roam and graze without constraints. Jimmy, the main character, resonates with this notion, suggesting that he shares this desire for unrestrained independence. The scene shifts to a restaurant, where Jimmy is seen in the midst of breaking up with his 13th girlfriend, implying that he has had many relationships in the past. At the same time, behind Jimmy, a girl named Anne is also ending her relationship with her partner, and the atmosphere is tense and uncomfortable. As both couples' partners storm off in anger, Jimmy and Anne find themselves alone. Just then, Anne expresses her desire to have lunch with Jimmy, which he agrees to instantly. It takes no time for them to get into a new relationship. If only we all had it as easy as Jim. In the next scene, we are shown a wedding, where one of Jimmy's friends is getting married. A long-standing tradition stipulates that whoever's girlfriend catches the bride's bouquet will be the next couple to marry. Despite their wild and free-spirited nature, Jimmy and his friends are eventually tethered to the institution of marriage by this societal expectation, and one by one they succumb to the pressure and tie the knot. In one of his friends' weddings, the same tradition unfolds as the bride tosses her bouquet to the awaiting crowd. To Jimmy's dismay, the bouquet is caught by none other than Anne, causing him to feel a sense of unease and concern for the future of his freedom. As he returns home, he sifts through old photos of his ex-girlfriends, all of whom have represented a certain degree of liberty and independence in his life. In the background, the sounds of thousands of horses running echoes, perhaps serving as a reminder of his previous wild and free-spirited existence. Or maybe all them horses are trying to tell Jim that he's gay. Later, Jimmy sits with his grandfather, a man who has experienced the very same conflict between individuality and marriage life. The grandfather urges Jimmy to embrace the societal expectations of marriage and procreation, sharing his own sacrifice of wild and carefree living in favor of family and legacy. He even offers Jimmy an engagement ring, signaling his desire to see his grandson conform to the norms of society. Despite his reluctance, Jimmy ultimately decides to propose to Anne after 3 years of dating. That evening, he takes her to an extravagant restaurant to express his proposal. However, it proves to be a difficult task because of his nervousness. Jimmy indirectly mentions that he had a desire to remain wild and free like a horse, but eventually, Anne won him over. This statement leaves Anne feeling confused, so she asks him what she has won, to which Jimmy responds that one cannot stay loyal to one toilet forever without defecating. Nice. Unfortunately, Anne becomes angry with him for saying something so distasteful in such a romantic setting. She also comes to realize that Jimmy doesn't really want to get married. He simply wants to live his bachelor life. Feeling enraged, Anne decides to go home and confide everything to her sister Natalie. She explains how everything went well except for Jimmy's proposal. Upon hearing this, Natalie assumes that Jimmy may have written a beautiful speech but lost it, causing him to improvise and say something inappropriate. However, Anne isn't willing to accept any excuses. With all that talk about horses, she knows Jimmy's dumb as a brick. She believes that this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment for both of them, and she really wanted him to do it right, which he didn't. After the disastrous proposal, Jimmy tries to make amends by sending Anne flowers every day, but despite his attempts to contact her, she refuses to answer his calls. Meanwhile, the news of Jimmy's embarrassing proposal spreads like wildfire throughout the city, leaving him feeling ashamed. A few days later, Jimmy receives the sad news of his grandfather's passing, and at the funeral, Anne finally pays him a visit. During their conversation, Jimmy asks her about their relationship, to which she responds that the door has not been closed yet, and if there is a nice knock, she may answer it, giving him a glimmer of hope. Just don't tell me I'm a toilet you want to poop in again, alright? However, things take an unexpected turn when Jimmy discovers that his grandfather has left him the family business and a substantial amount of wealth. But under certain conditions. The first condition is that he must be married by 6:05 p.m. on his 30th birthday, which happens to be just 1 day away. The second condition is that he and his wife cannot be apart for more than a week at a time over the next 10 years, and they must try to have a child within the first 5 years of their marriage. In case Jimmy doesn't succeed, his business rival, Odin Sports, will acquire the complete company. As a result, the unmarried man, along with his companions and a clergyman, must hurry to find find a suitable bride within the next few hours. In the next scene, Jimmy immediately heads to find Anne, only to discover that she has left for further studies in Athens. However, this time, he is not going to give up so easily. Determined to propose to her before it's too late, he rushes to the heliport and thankfully makes it just in time. Clad in a dashing tuxedo, Jimmy gets down on one knee and pours his heart out to Anne, urging her to say yes. However, Anne is taken aback by his sudden appearance and the presence of a priest behind in the car. She questions whether Jimmy is truly ready to give up his bachelor lifestyle, causing him to hesitate and reminisce about his wild days. Oh, those horses. This moment of doubt causes Annie to realize that Jimmy is not yet ready to fully commit, and she hastily departs in the helicopter, leaving Jimmy feeling lost. However, despite her initial decision to continue on to Athens, Anne has a change of heart and returns to her apartment, where she confides in her sister. Natalie suggests that they visit their parents for the night, giving Anne time to think about her feelings and the situation with Jimmy. Meanwhile, Jimmy is faced with a tough decision himself. He could remain single and forfeit the wealth that he inherited from his grandfather, or he could marry one of his old flames and retrieve the fortune, saving the jobs of hundreds of workers employed by the company. With no other options left, Jimmy reluctantly turns to a shoebox full of old photos of his ex-girlfriends, after which he embarks on a quest to track them down and convince them to marry him. Jimmy's journey to find a suitable bride takes him on a roller coaster ride of emotions as he encounters various ex-girlfriends in search of his future wife. He first goes to a girl named Stacy, with whom he enjoyed several romantic dates in the past. Unfortunately, she is already engaged to someone, and when Jimmy learns about this, he is dejected. Next up is Zoe, a window dresser who appears to be very cheerful. As soon as Jimmy approaches her, she eagerly jumps into his arms, thrilled that he thought of her after being rejected by Anne. Their chemistry is palpable, and it seems like Jimmy's proposal may finally succeed. But just as things are heating up, he hears Anne's voice and abruptly runs off after a woman he believes to be her. However, his mistake becomes apparent, and by the time he returns to Zoe, she has set a mannequin on fire in a fit of rage. Jimmy's next attempt at finding a bride leads him to his actress ex-girlfriend, Ilana, who flat out refuses his proposal, stating that she is not one to chase after money. Why do you think I got into the arts, stupid? Feeling discouraged, but not defeated, Jimmy sets his sights on Carolyn, a graduate student who is fiercely independent and a feminist at heart. Despite her initial interest in Jimmy, she refuses to be used as a mere commodity to retrieve his grandfather's wealth, leaving him to ponder his next move. The day goes from bad to worse for Jimmy when his car breaks down, so he, along with his friend Marco and the weary priest, continue their search via local bus. On the flip side, Annie and her sister arrive at their parents' house and are greeted warmly. However, the visit does not seem to change their mood, because their parents' excessive displays of affection irritates them. While eating dinner, the mother excuses herself to go to the restroom, but the father calls out to her, saying he already misses her. Oh, lovey-dovey. Liar. Unable to bear any more of their lovey-dovey moments, Anne and Natalie storm out of the house. Meanwhile, Jimmy proceeds to the police station to meet his next girlfriend, Daphne, who happens to be a police officer. Even though Daphne has to deal with criminals on a daily basis, she still manages to preserve her beauty. However, when she realizes that Jimmy is proposing to her solely for his inheritance, she confronts him and delivers a resounding Will Smith. Oh, wow! Eventually, Jimmy's list of ex-girlfriends runs out, but he does manage to convince his final choice, an arrogant girl named Buckley who despises him a lot. Without delay, she is fitted with a bridal dress and prepared for the wedding. However, as the priest attempts to conduct the ceremony, Buckley gradually becomes aware of the other stipulations of the will. At first, she learns about the requirement to be together for 10 years, which she believes is doable as she can get half of Jimmy's wealth. However, when Buckley discovers that she must have a baby within 5 years, she is unable to bear the pressure and drives away. As everyone scrambles to convince the girl to come back, Jimmy realizes that he has only 17 hours left before the contract expires. In the morning, Jimmy and the priest are in a park surrounded by happy couples. The sight of the couples prompts the priest to share his own experience of having a successful marriage. He reveals that he was married for 26 years and had a large family with 4 sons and 10 grandchildren. "My family likes sex a whole lot," says the priest. He speaks fondly of his wife and how much he loved her. Even after her death, he still believes that getting married was the best decision he ever made. According to the priest, true happiness comes from being with someone who loves you and will grow old with you. Jimmy is moved by the priest's story, and he begins to see the importance of marriage. He realizes that he has been thinking about Anne constantly and cannot stop himself from wanting to be with her. Afterwards, Jimmy, who has not slept all night, is asked to rest for a while in a church where Marco had promised to deliver a bride by that evening. Elsewhere, Anne misses Jimmy and decides to return to the city. She tries to reach him on the phone, but in vain. She then calls Marco and asks him to arrange a dinner with Jimmy. However, it's too late because Marco has already published an ad in the newspaper announcing that whoever marries Jimmy before 6 p.m. can win $100 million. This announcement causes a frenzy among women who want to marry Jimmy for the money. Numerous women around the city start to dress up as brides and rush to the church to try and win the prize money. In the next scene, Jimmy wakes up to a surreal sight of hundreds of women surrounding him, all of whom are interested in the eligible bachelor. As he tries to make sense of the situation, he realizes that the women are becoming increasingly aggressive in their pursuit of him. Just as he is unable to handle the situation, his friend Marco appears and claims that it was all just a prank. He tries to convince the women to leave, but they are still not willing to let Jimmy go so easily. In the midst of all this chaos, Jimmy and Marco find a room to hide in. While they are hiding, Marco reveals that Anne is on her way back, which makes Jimmy ecstatic. He immediately rushes to the train station to meet her, ordering a cake on the way. Despite being pursued by the brides, he somehow manages to make it to the station. When Jimmy finds Anne, she has already seen the news headline with his picture and the question, "Would you marry this man for $100 million?" Anne is understandably upset, but Jimmy finally confesses his true feelings for her. He tells her that she is the most precious gift and the most romantic story of his life. He truly wishes to be with her for the rest of their lives. Moved by his words, Anne finally agrees to marry him. As she heads to the restroom to change into a wedding dress, the rally of brides arrives there. After a wild chase through the city, Jimmy makes his way up a flight of stairs on a fire escape. He then calls out for Anne as the pack of brides closes in on him. Luckily, she is able to weave her way through the throng of women and reach Jimmy's side. From inside a police car, the priest officiates the wedding over a loudspeaker, which causes many of the brides to attack the car. But despite the chaos, Anne delivers a heartfelt message to the crowd about her relationship with Jimmy, which finally calms the other women down. Following this, the priest completes the ceremony by declaring Jimmy and Anne as husband and wife. The crowd, now delighted to witness the couple's union, cheers loudly for them. Jimmy and Anne make it just in time before the deadline of 6:05 p.m. to inherit the $100 million. Kinda shocked they didn't miss the deadline. It would have made for a more meaningful ending, I think. The movie ends as Anne tosses her bouquet into the teeming crowd below. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.